It may seem by now that the good old days are a myth, a looking back on times that never in fact existed, but they were good times for many Americans, an eternal summertime of life, drifting in a secure and ordered world. If things weren't perfect, it was only a matter of time, and there was lots of time. Time for everything. Generations grew old, knowing who they were, where they belonged. Time past and time present and time to come was very much the same, or so it seemed. But underneath the easy waltz time of the gay 90s was a new and different tempo, just beginning to be heard, like the impatient tapping of a foot, a syncopated beat that would give another name to the turn of the old century: ragtime. Ragtime. Scott Joplin's classic Maple Leaf Rag was written in 1897. Joplin was black. His music sounded ragged to most whites, so ragtime. White people heard it first at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. It fit the fair and the time. It was good time music for an age of expositions. Chicago, Buffalo, St. Louis. Meet me at the fair. The Chicago Fair had a hit ride, a giant wheel designed by George Ferris. The Ferris wheel, as impressive a symbol of progress as the Corliss engine had been in 1876. Except this machine was made for fun. In 1893, the nation was in another depression, the deepest yet, and many were looking for escape, up and away, anywhere the lights were shining, as they were at the St. Louis Fair in 1904. The turn of the century was a show-off time of restless energy. And no one personified that energy better than Theodore Roosevelt. Cowboy, soldier, reformer, president, the man of the age. TR, as most everybody called him, had a ferocious grin. It expressed his attitude, the attitude of the time. Everything, according to Teddy, was bully. Roosevelt's life spanned the confident years, from beginning to end. He's the little boy in the window looking down on Lincoln's funeral procession in New York City, or so it's believed. And here he is in New York Harbor in 1910, returning from Europe. To the far right is another young man who would be president, TR's cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In between, TR was always in motion. One friend described him as pure act.
I'm only an average man, but by George, I work harder at it than the average man.
He worked hard on himself. Born frail, nearsighted, asthmatic, by 1885 he turned himself into this stalwart cowboy, punching cattle in the Dakota Badlands, a gentleman cowboy. In 1895 he became New York's police commissioner, his office on Mulberry Street. He battled the slums alongside Jacob Riis. Said Riis,
"Together, we drove the last nail in the coffin of the bad old days."
in New York in the 90s, a newspaper battle was brewing between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's Journal. Both needed something to boost circulation, something like a war. Hearst sent artist Frederick Remington down to Spanish Cuba to report on a tired revolution there. Remington wired,
"There is no war in Cuba."
Hearst wired back,
"You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war."
or so the legend goes. Finally, the Spaniards furnished the war by blowing up the U.S. battleship Maine in Havana Harbor. At least, someone or something blew it up. The Journal certainly blew it up into the Journal's War, as the paper bragged, otherwise known as the Spanish-American War of 1898. The battle cry was,
"Remember the Maine. To hell with Spain."
Roosevelt was in the Navy Department at the time,
I don't want to be in office. I want to be at the front.
so he sent off an important Navy Department message to the men's clothing store, Brooks Brothers.
Can you make me a regular lieutenant colonel's uniform with leggings? If so, Make it. A charge, Mr. Roosevelt.
Then Mr. Roosevelt charged up San Juan Hill in Cuba at the head of his personal regiment, the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry, Teddy's Rough Riders, a collection of cowboys, cops, and socialites out for the sport of war. Among them was Dudley Dean, star quarterback for TR's old school, Harvard. Teddy's charge up San Juan Hill was not quite as pictured here. In fact, the charge was made up Kettle Hill on foot. But no matter, TR became the hero of the war, along with Admiral Dewey, who defeated the Spanish fleet at Manila Bay in the Philippines. In 10 weeks, the whole thing was over. We'd freed Cuba, taken Puerto Rico and the Philippines. The U.S. was now a world power. Said one politician,
It's been a splendid little war.
the hero of San Juan Hill became vice president in 1900. He complained
I've been put on the shelf.
he wasn't on the shelf long. In September of 1901, President McKinley was assassinated, and TR became the youngest president in our history.
That damn cowboy is President of the United States.
The cowboy's style in office was, as always, strenuous.
I enjoy being president. The White House is a bully pulpit. I preach to you, my countrymen, that our country calls not for the life of ease, but the life of strenuous endeavor.
As president, TR endeavored to push for reform, push gently. Here he is as Jack the Giant Killer in Wall Street, taking on the robber barons.
We demand that big business give the people a square deal.
And here he is again at the center of things, digging the Panama Canal in a white suit.
I took the isthmus, started the canal, and left Congress to debate.
A debate that's still going on. Besides being a bully pulpit, the White House was a bully place to raise kids, at least for the kids. TR's 6 children and their friends became known as the White House Gang. Here are 2 leaders of the gang, Archie and little Quentin Roosevelt, lining up with the White House guards on review. The guards had their hands full. Besides swimming in the White House fountain and roller skating in the halls, Quentin took his pony up in the elevator. And Alice, the oldest, smoked, drove her own car, and carried a live garter snake in her purse, none of which was done by proper young ladies of the time. When TR was asked to do something about her, he replied,
I can be president of the United States, or I can control Alice. I cannot possibly do both.
Alice could have been the model for every emancipated young woman's ideal, the Gibson Girl, created in the 90s by artist Charles Dana Gibson, an ideal that would last until the First World War. And this Roosevelt-inspired creation would outlast them all. The teddy bear, named for TR when he refused to shoot a bear cub on a hunting trip. Teddy left the presidency in 1908, but he would run again in 1912 as an independent candidate.
I feel as strong as a bull moose.
So his party was called the Bull Moose Party. 3 weeks before the election, he was shot. The speech he carried, folded in his breast pocket, saved him.
I'll make this speech or die.
With a bullet in his chest, he made the speech, but lost the election to Woodrow Wilson. TR would die in his sleep on January 6, 1919. The vice president said,
Death had to take him sleeping. If Roosevelt had been awake, there would have been a fight.
the man of the age, an age of first events. He was the first president to use his power to settle a strike instead of crushing it. The first president to go abroad while in office. The first to invite a black to the White House, Booker T. Washington. And the first president to fly. In fact, he was one of the first Americans to fly. Here he is, grimly hanging on, about to go up in 1910. It was dangerous. The pilot standing next to him died in a crash the following year. The dream of powered flight was ancient. Gliders and balloons had taken men aloft, but no one had managed to get a powered, heavier-than-air machine off the ground in controlled flight. Some of the attempts were fairly hilarious when they weren't fatal. During the 90s, it seemed every backyard mechanic came up with a flying machine that wouldn't fly. The only flying done was in the pages of boys' weeklies. This electric air schooner went up in the pages of Pluck and Luck in 1902. No relation to hero Jack Wright were two bicycle repairmen, Orville and Wilbur Wright. In the back of their shop in Dayton, Ohio, among spokes and sprockets, they built a series of contraptions they called flyers. Starting in 1900, they took their kites to a deserted, wind-swept beach on the Outer Banks of North Carolina called Kitty Hawk. Then, from the top of Kill Devil Hill, they began flying manned gliders, taking turns, developing control. In 1903, they arrived with something new, something with two wooden propellers and a little 12-horse motor. Orville lay belly down next to the engine. Wilbur watched the flyers slide down the track to the end and lift clear of the earth and fly. On the last flight of the day, December 17th, it stayed up almost a minute. This is one of the great photographs of the 20th century. The moment an old dream came true, made real by vision and hard work. In TR's words,
"Keep your eyes on the stars, keep your feet on the ground."
for those who preferred the ground to the stars, there were other ways to get around. The bicycle business that had supported the Wright brothers was big business in the 90s. A bicycle craze was on. And riding one of these early bone shakers with their high iron wheels was a little like flying. You were a long way up from the ground. When the safety cycle came out, riders came back to earth and multiplied into the millions. It seemed everyone was riding a bike, trying to. Here is Frances E. Willard, founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, setting out with a little help from a friend. It seems to have taken her 3 months to master Gladys, as she named her bike. While Miss Willard was wobbling down the road, another vehicle was gaining on her, something called a road engine, the first automobile. By 1900, there were only about 8,000 cars in the U.S., most of them big and expensive, toys for the wealthy. There were a few smaller, less expensive cars. One was the Stanley Twins water-powered Stanley steamer. By 1903, one of these flying teapots had gone almost a mile a minute. But there was a car coming that would overtake them all, at least in numbers. It would be made by Henry Ford.
A scientific discovery is a fine thing, but it doesn't help the world until it's put on a business basis.
Eyes on the stars, feet on the ground. Like many young Americans at the time, Ford left the farm for the city as a mechanic for the Edison Company in Detroit. In his spare time, he built a car, this one, his first, the 1896 Autocycle. Henry's at the tiller. By 1908, he'd developed a car that would put America on the road, the Model T, otherwise known as the Tin Lizzie. Lizzie came in one color, black. There was no door on the driver's side, so you couldn't fall out. But she was cheap and indestructible. Almost. In time, half the cars in America would be Model Ts, 15 million of them. And it seemed there was a joke for every one of them.
My Ford don't need a speedometer. When she's going 5 miles an hour, the fender rattles. 12 miles an hour, my teeth rattle. 15, and the transmission drops out.
One day's production of Model Ts in 1913. The car was running over the old leisurely way of life, of doing things. Henry Ford had invented the assembly line, and workers became parts in a machine.
In the past, the man had been first. In the future, the system must be first.
The tempo of American life was speeding up. The size of things was growing. Machines dwarfing the men who served them. Buildings soaring above the clouds. New York from above. The tower is the Woolworth Building. In 1913, the tallest in the world. And small miracles were in the air. a little bottle full of wires. The first radio tube, invented by Lee DeForest in 1906. It may well be the most important invention of the century, the basis for all the computers, television, satellites, missile guidance systems, and yet unknown pleasures and terrors to come. Unknown terrors were coming from Europe in the form of modern art, modern music. The painting by Picasso is 1907. The music by Stravinsky is 1910. New Yorkers saw this at the famous Armory Show in 1913. But most Americans were interested in other pictures of each other. Here we have a picture of a man taking a picture of the man taking this picture. The man in the picture is George Eastman in 1890 with his new Kodak camera. The picture is round because the first Kodak took round pictures, 100 of them. Then you sent the whole camera to Eastman, and they sent you back your pictures and camera reloaded.
You press the button, we do the rest.
Pretty soon, everybody was pressing the button, recording little events for the family album, simple images that form our picture of the confident years. Henry Ford believed the only worthwhile history was written in the things people made and used every day. If that is so, then this is history. Their own record of the good days they had, all dressed up and clowning for the camera on a glorious 4th of July. Parading down Main Street on a windy Memorial Day in 1890, they participated in a kind of patriotism natural to them. They were moved by it, certain they were part of a way of life, a country that was the best on earth and getting better.
We have only started on our development of our country. We have not done more than scratch the surface.
It's been said we look back on these scenes, these years, with a kind of homesickness, not just for a place, but for a time of simplicity, certainty, security, a time of peace, a time gone, a time already drifting toward disorder and war, a war that would take this boy, grown up. Quentin Roosevelt would die in aerial combat over Germany, flying one of the new weapons of that war. We leave them now, still unaware of what was ahead, still calm and secure, looking eastward to the sea. But the ship had already sailed. The confident years were over.